Welcome everyone to the first edition of SDG Action Conclave 2020. We are conducting today's session focusing on SDG Goal 11, that is, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Let me give you a brief about our organization. The Youth Forum is a project under Alexis Society, and our team consists of inspiring young students and professionals who are solely interested in creating positive social impact by conducting research on policy issues, writing thought provoking and insightful blogs, designing creative social campaigns, organizing life changing events, and interviewing leaders and change makers. As it is correctly said that the youth are not only the leaders of tomorrow, but the partners of today. So, we at Youth Forum, a team of creative and encouraging individuals with a shared mission, a mission to change the world. So, through this first edition of the SDG Action Conclave, we wish to bring together the change makers and the leaders from around the globe under the Act for SDGs campaign week of the United Nations. It will help to prepare an actionable agenda that will aid all in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals through all the initiatives and more. While the world leaders meet virtually at the United Nations General Assembly to take up the trying issues and give a solution to the tough times, we are trying to do a small bit by taking action and raising awareness and initiating a better direction ahead. The turning point of the world and of the people needs to be now. Let me now introduce to you the speaker. Firstly, sir, we are very glad to have you with us. Sir Sergio Fernandez de Cordova is an internationally recognized entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist working at the intersection of media and leveraging public private partnerships for social impact. He is dedicated to the purpose of building smart cities from the ground up. He began his entrepreneurial career at the age of 12 by starting newspaper with his mother and went on to co-found Fuel Outdoor Holdings, IMGH, P3 Global Management, Things, P3 Smart City Partners, and Captain. He is currently the chairman of the Public Foundation, which is an innovative non-profit media organization that harnesses the power of media to drive social change. Today and over the past decade, Sir has served or structured global movements in the capacities of private sector advisory group board member of the SDG Fund United Nations representative for ISEC International, and many more. He has also been the recipient of many honors for his entrepreneurial success. As a reflection of his progressive understanding of business and a burgeoning global economy, he strives to drive a social change by instilling innovation in the corporate world. He is a true expert in harnessing the available resources for a greater and a sustainable tomorrow. Good morning to you, sir. We are so honored to have you with us. Now,
Morning, Arushi. Thank you so much. Thank you for that amazing introduction. Thank you so much for your time and your dedication.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to introduce to you the chair. So Kunal Mandal is the co-founder of GameSpace, a gamification program which uses quizzes and other games as a tool for personal growth and people engagement. And CityBitesIndia.com, a travel portal which helps travelers discover and book inspiring city experiences provided by local experts. Currently, he is on a mission to teach curiosity as a life skill, increase awareness about sustainability, and empower young Indians to be more than what they thought they could be. So, to take forward discussions while trying to arrive at solutions through this session on SDG 11, I would like to hand over the conduct to Mr. Kunal, sir.
Thank you, Arushi. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you who is joining in and listening in. I have a very, very special guest for today's session, and I have Sergio Fernandez de Cordova with me. Sergio, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you.
Well, let me rightfully, I mean, your introduction was, and the kind of work that you're doing is so inspiring. Let me dive into your work and try and know a little more about you through the questions that I have for you. So, so of course, today's focus goal is goal number 11, building sustainable cities and communities. And the fact that the world's population is constantly increasing and it is projected to reach 8.5 billion by 2030.
Yep.
To accommodate everyone, we need to build modern, sustainable, affordable, and resilient cities with green living conditions. You have initiated change along these lines by introducing opportunity zones, the kind of work that you are doing there. Now, COVID has, of course, changed the outlook towards world quite a bit, and sort of we need to rethink how we are doing things or how we were doing things before. And my question to you at this point would be that if you could tell us a little bit about opportunities zones and the kind of work that you are doing there, and also please tell us that in a post-COVID future, what are the opportunities that are there to rebuild our communities, and what role can smart cities play into it?
Well, thank you, Kunal. Thank you so much for again for your time, for the work that you do. And as I said before, just really excited and honored to be here. As you said, a lot of the work that I've been doing, I've just been a crazy entrepreneur. So the bug bit when I was 12 years old and realized that I could actually do something with my time and not just play video games or do other things that kids do. But I bought my first computer, Commodore 64. And it was all over from there. And I just feel like every chapter of my life, it's just been an evolution that's just opened up the next door. And, when it comes to where we are today and sort of where the world is, where, how the world is embracing, COVID-19, the world is living through an unprecedented crisis, right? COVID-19 continues to spread throughout communities, villages, towns, and cities. Right. And no matter what one does, ultimately, the city is the infrastructure that we live in, the community, the town, the village, and people continue to work, travel, socialize. And so, as we look at how smart cities, resilient cities, and cities as a whole plays into a pandemic and a post-pandemic, it is, to me, one of the greatest opportunities to really build the right framework, to really make the right focus not only on health of cities and the health of the humans inside of them, but also how are we building better, building back better, and putting mechanisms that bring private sector, NGO, intergovernmental, and a global agenda like the Sustainable Development Goals together. Right? When people say, what happens post-COVID-19? Well, hey, we already have a global agenda. Secretary General talks about this all the time, especially most recently, which is we have a framework. We just need to follow it. And when I look at smart cities and when I look at SDG 11, for all of you that don't know the stats, right, there's over 1,430 cities in 210 countries that are at this point, I think, affected by COVID-19. That's cities, communities, right? 95% of these cases are in urban area. Right, 1 billion people live in informal settlements, slums, and overcrowded and inadequate housing. So we start looking at these stats, right? Technology is the only way we're going to be able to accelerate this. Technology is what's going to give us the ability to do social distancing, right? When you start to look at some of this data, to me, what's really exciting about the work that we've been doing is that now we finally have an opportunity to not just talk about smart cities from a business perspective and how we're helping cities and create impactful solutions, but also how we are looking at smart cities as sort of the future framework of how we could save all these people that are living in slums and villages and least developed areas of communities and cities. And because we have all the solutions around us. That's one of the things that drives me so passionate, is that we have the solutions, right? We just need to implement them. We need to educate young leaders like Arushi to actually see and read the roadmap and say, hey, how do I build people-focused, intelligent communities, right? It's not about how much tech can we put out there, but when you look at smart cities, the smart cities as itself is to service people, not to create more tech for tech to talk to tech. It is for the benefit of humans, for the benefit of people, right? And to me, when I see smart cities become so over-techified, if you will, right, we've forgotten the people. Who is going to use them? So if people don't have phones, if people don't have connectivity, if people don't have access to technology, then what are we making smart, right? So to me, when I look at post-COVID and COVID right now, because God, I hope post-COVID is soon and we can be looking back, right? But right now we are living one of the world's greatest, unfortunately, disaster, we've seen in a lifetime, and then some, right? A pandemic that really has reached the entire world. Right now, to me, that's where SDG 11 starts to become sort of the center of it all, just like community is the center. We are community in whatever, our families, our villages, our cities, our towns, and or how we connect with each other, our communities, our ecosystems. So I think that there is incredible opportunity, but we don't need to reinvent things. What we need to do is pay attention to the things that have already been built around us and start to implement them. So, to me, that's why in a, sort of what are the opportunities? There are many, because of the next generation just needs to understand how to engage, right? Just like when I was 12, I found a computer. That was my gateway to becoming who I'll become tomorrow. But I'll never forget that if I didn't have that, that roadmap and the only tool how to build a newsletter. I built a newspaper, right? So it's all as basic as showing someone the roadmap. So that's why I'm also excited to be here, because I believe that embracing and engaging the next generation, some of the work that Kunal, you've been doing, that I've been doing, that we're all doing, it's in each generation, right? And it is their turn now, especially in a pandemic environment where everybody has an opportunity to do something for somebody.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think engaging the young people with a roadmap for the future, that can do wonders. And you mentioned that solutions are all existing sort of all around us. It's just we need the community at the center of it to ultimately be able to implement it. And that's I think it's a great point that you made. And now I come to another piece of the puzzle. Of course, you have said that with the least developed areas and all, housing and sort of new ways of building those spaces for them is going to change a lot of things. But the matter of the fact remains that World Bank says that nearly half of the world lives, half of the world population lives on less than $5 a day, $5.50 a day, and our utmost concern should be making these smart cities affordable. So one of the questions that I have for you is, like, what steps can be taken to make sustainable cities more economical or cost effective? And I would love to know, you mentioned your work with UN Habitat. I'm sure some amazing things have happened there. So please tell us about what the UN is doing, and what are some of the programs that people can attend or learn about, these sort of work that is happening, and they can also be part of the conversation and get involved.
So basically, based on your question, thank you for that, Kunal. There's so many programs that are out there right now. There's so many initiatives. When you look at sort of what is the UN is doing, right? UN is one of the greatest organizations in the world. We're celebrating 75-year anniversary of the creation of the UN in October. And when you look at the value proposition, is that it's all focused on rebuilding our communities. When you look at UN Habitat, which really solely focuses on SDG 11, it's sort of its core. And you think about, where's that convergence of technology meets innovation, meets a global agenda, and for the benefit of all. And, UN has flagship programs, UN Habitat. If you go to UN Habitat/programs, you'll see their flagship programs, which talks about, inclusive, vibrant neighborhoods and communities as one of the programs, right? Rebuilding our communities, right? Sometimes it's not just how technology plays a role, but how you bring back culture, how you bring back community, how you bring back inclusivity, right? Sometimes that could be the smartest things we do, right? Really, believe it or not, right? Just how simple that is, right? People say to me, what is a smart city? Well, I always tell people, I'm like, well, a smart city is about people. It's about community. Why are we making it smart if we're not thinking about that community, right? So when you start to look at what programs, right, that's a kind of one of their flagship programs. The other one is people-focused smart cities, right? going back to what I was just saying, right? How are you building a smart city if you don't have users, right? I've met so many young entrepreneurs that say, hey, I'm building the next unicorn. Well, how are you implementing that? How are you helping people, right? How is that going to benefit in a COVID, post-COVID scenario? Are you being part of the solution, or are you going to become part of the problem, right? As you said, Kunal, the data metrics that you gave, I mean, the World Bank, the UN, everybody, has pushed out all this data that's just astronomical. But at the end of the day, as big as these numbers look, yeah, right, Kunal, it all goes back to the community. When they say about politics, it's all local. When you talk about communities, villages, and towns, it's a cluster of communities. They create a spoken hub model, which is a region. Then it starts to create, a county, a state, a country, right? And ultimately, it all starts and it all moves around these little ecosystems and these little communities that are interconnected. This community has the temple, the church, the synagogue. This community has all the markets. This one is where all the farming is. This is where the industrialization. And fast forward, here we are. So when you look at how can you build, smarter cities, right? And from the ground up, especially now, COVID, this is a program that I'm excited about because it's building people-focused smart cities, right? And that is, again, I really must emphasize, right? Because being people-focused is talking about digital transformation, right? Policy, making sure no one's left behind, right? Financial digital urbanization, right? Innovation around the urban landscape, digital empowerment. What people also forget is capacity building. If you are not educating the next generation, I don't just mean Arushi as the next generation, but I'm talking about onboarding people that have never used technology. So then all of a sudden you're building all these solutions for the benefit of who? Where are we? How are we building capacity so that we're creating the jobs of tomorrow? People talk about smart cities and IoT and AI are going to, delete the jobs and nobody's going to have a job. No, we need to evolve with it. They're not replacing us because they need us, right? These technologies ultimately need humans behind it. So humans that know how to integrate it, interoperate it, right? Scale it, and make sure that you're leaving no one behind. To me, technology is one of the greatest opportunities when you look at technology in communities to make sure that we literally leave no one behind. When I see entrepreneurs come up with solutions, I'm like, how are you benefiting the community? What is it? ROC, right? Return on community. What is it? Nobody knows how to answer that. What goals have you met? What goals are you accomplishing? Well, I'm going to make a lot of money. That's great. But how are you making the community better? I don't know. Well, once I have the money, I will. No. If you're not building the DNA from the beginning where it is inclusive, then you are part of the problem, right? And some of these flagship programs really lay this out because, we've been involved in, helping structure a public-private partnership policy around people-centric public-private partnerships, right? So that's kind of, another program we're talking about, resilience settlements for the urban poor, right? It's called the Rise Up program. The resilience settlements, again, that's really, focused on those that are the least advantaged. And then how are we using these solutions to support their development, right? What are we doing within all of these solutions, again, under the context of, resilience, under the context of, how technology could play a role, right? Physical locations are usually fragile. People live in steep slopes, coastlines, and floodplains, right? What, the socioeconomic characteristics of these residents are high level of poverty, illiteracy, right? And these communities have, low ability to deal with climate impact and climate change. And we're seeing that all throughout the world, right? And how are we using technology to support this? How are we using technology to ready them, to prepare them? That's smart building, smart city, community, right? Identify and profile hotspots, identify particularly vulnerabilities of target groups, including women, children, and youth, right? And sometimes when you're looking at smart technology and smart innovation, they get left behind, right? Incorporate community level efforts to broaden citywide planning, right? So that in a climate crisis, we have a plan to leave no one behind. That is called intelligence. That is called smart. Most people call that, resilience. But when you're building into a city, into a community, you must manage what, outcomes are possible, downside risk is, right? Otherwise, you're not thinking inclusively, right? And so, that's another element, right? Then we're looking at another program called the, Inclusive Cities Engaging the Positive Impact of Urban Migration, right? And that's, that's another major conversation, right? Where we're talking about how do we help people that are leaving and migrating into a new community, and cities usually are the major destination for migrants, right? And really, how do you support local and national authorities to create inclusive and non-discriminatory urban environments for all people, especially in situations where, rapid influx of people that has led to urban cities because they are trying to build a better life. They are trying to build a better future for their children and their children's children. And, that becomes something that is often overlooked when it comes to, what it means to build an intelligent and a smart city, right? And then really you get into, the overarching, which is their fifth program, which is the Sustainable Development Goals Cities, right? Which kind of packages it all together. And now we're looking and talking about, just the basic, how do we start to implement all the SDGs, right? Not just looking at SDG 11 as the sort of be all for solving and creating smart cities, right? But really the element of actually now embracing the entire agenda and how are we implementing with technology, right? Strategic investment. How make sure that there's education. Remember, I said capacity building, making sure that we're resilient, that we're ready. And then also one of the things that I also find really fascinating and also an opportunity is that, and what we do is the element of what, copy paste. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Now, we don't need to over innovate innovation. What we need to do, right? Because why, everybody thinks that their idea is going to be better. I'm a guy, when I look at the smart cities mapping and the master planning, I'm trying to say, hey, who's done it before? Arushi's friend did this amazing program on mobility in her town. Well, hey, can we scale that idea, right? Because when you're talking about impact and you're talking about human lives, there should never be an ego. There should be, how do we solve, right? And to me, a lot of the work that we've embraced with the UN, with the SDG Fund, with UN Habitats, we're really excited about the opportunities to really, and that's one of the things I was saying, is to educate people, Kunal, about not just, what, to get involved in something as exciting as smart cities, but to also rudimentary focus the DNA on how we could teach them to do it with purpose, how we could teach them to do it in a way that is replicable, and how we could teach them to do it in a way that's inclusive. And last but not least, and for all of you who are saying, okay, great, Sergio, how do I get involved? What can I do? Right, for example, with the UN Habitat, there's a program coming up right now in October, which is called Urban October, 31 Days of Promoting a Better Urban Life. Right, what you'll see in this program, if you go to, I think it's urbanoctober.unhabitat.org. And Urban October is an opportunity for everyone to be part of the conversation. So this is exactly everyone who's listening should go to that link, get involved, learn about it, right? And basically, the whole idea of this initiative of Urban October is a conversation about the challenges and opportunities created by the fast rate of change in our cities and towns, right? So basically, UN Habitat has every October, everyone is interested in sustainable urbanization, right? From national to local governments to universities to schools, right? Building capacities, NGOs, communities, or everyone is encouraged to take on this conversation. That's why I was also excited, the timeline of us having this and lead up to October, right? And I mean, when you look at October, the month begins with the World Humanitarian Day on the first Monday of October, right? The 5th of October this year in 2020. It ends with the World Cities Day on October 31st, right? So there's going to be an incredible amount of activities and things for everyone, every one of you that says, I want to learn, right? Because one of the things is I go back to me when I was 12 and people say, well, what got you started? Well, how did you get here? It's just every time I had an opportunity to learn, I took the journey. I learned, and every day it took me to the next and to the next. So if you don't start now and you don't have a means of what to get into, and that's why to me, Urban October is a great opportunity for everyone listening to say, hey, find yourself, find that thing that identifies with you the most, and then seek it and pursue it and educate yourself, and then we'll see, let the journey begin.
There's so many points you touched, and you said to be people focused, humans are at the center of it, and humans should ideally be part of the solution, not the problem. And of course, I am aware, and in fact, from my company, we have conducted quizzes on World Habitat Day, that is on 5th October every year for the last 5 years. And this is one way for us to generate awareness and engage more youth in the conversation. And I'm glad that you mentioned, how October is going to be a crucial month for us to look at how we're going to live in the future. And that's, I think, very much important for youths to participate in that dialogue and become. So everyone who is listening in, as Sergio has suggested, check out Urban October. We will, of course, put out the link on the video itself. And please join in the conversation and participate. That's what more counts. Sergio, out of all the things that you've mentioned, I will highlight something because I'm from India, and the fact that we were discussing developing countries and budgets. So one of the things is matter of fact cannot be ignored that India has about 14 times lesser budget than US to build cities, new cities from ground up, let alone be smart cities. So my question is that, and this is a problem that exists across multiple developing countries where budgets are very, very less. But the fact is, if you have to build a great and modern city, you need funds. So I would like to know two things from you. If you are doing some work in the policy side, please tell us how it has been received and what kind of work, so that people can also do similar things. And also, what are some of the best frameworks that you have seen across the world? And if you can, just give us some examples, that would be really nice.
Just unmuting myself. Absolutely, Kunal, and thank you for that. I mean, to me, when you look at smart cities and when you look at the future cities, when you look at the future of how you bring capital, and is imperative, right? It's imperative because that is the framework. If you can't bring capital into a situation and then it not be regenerative, it not be a way that folks know how to teach people how to fish, not give them fish, right? This whole element, it's been an unfortunate reality in the least developed parts of the world, where expectations are government's going to fix it. Somebody is going to fix it, right? So I'm just going to hang and wait until somebody does, and then a lifetime goes by, and the cycle begins again. And so when you look at smart cities, goes back to what I was saying, is it's an incredible opportunity because we could cut costs, right? But we also need frameworks, Kunal, that allows us to build an ecosystem, right? Build an economic engine, right? And that's where capacity building comes in so important, because if you don't teach people how to be the leaders of tomorrow through the ecosystem of that building of that city. So why smart cities has had such a lag and such a slow uptick, and why it doesn't work even, I met with Minister Puri, and and when India first launched all of their initiatives, 1,000 smart cities, and what happened was people were building apps, right? What happened was people were building solutions that not everybody could be a part of. It was a bit of fluff, right? Because every municipality, not India, the world, every government leader says, oh, okay, I'll do an app and we'll call it Smart City, but it doesn't connect to anything, right? So if I'm a local resident, how is it helping me? If I'm somebody that's underserved, how is it helping me? if I am somebody that has no access to medical services and I live out in the top of the mountain in the village, disconnected from the local small village, how will people know I need something if they, I have an app, but it connects to nobody? And so, these things have been sort of quick solutions to make it look like we're doing something. And when you look at, when people say, like when we first started out in the smart city journey, to me, it was about social impact, environmental impact, economic impact, right? SEE. So if we can't see it, right, and it doesn't have a regenerative, then we're not interested at the moment. Therefore, that meant that either A, we needed to look at policy, and B, we needed, because policy, the reason why I say policy, and a lot of folks don't want to look at it, is you've got to figure out how you bring money into the project, right? Now, if I'm starting a project in a small community, but I don't have multi-stakeholders and multi-stakeholder governance, which means, for all of you there, which means that you have everybody, you have government sector, you have private sector, you have a NGO, an intergovernmental agency like the health department, transportation, what have you, right? And civil society, folks, leadership from the community. Somebody like Arushi says, I'm not involved in any of this conversation, but I am a benefactor and I want to provide my input, right? Because so often in smart cities and smart communities and resilient communities and cities, we build for what we think people need rather than what actually people need, which goes back to what I was saying, Kunal, which was smart cities is about people, right? So now when you're looking at framework, I've been a huge throughout my career about public-private partnerships, right? Why? Because I'm not a Silicon Valley guy. I grew up in New York for the most part, world traveler. I'm not selling unicorns. I like to talk about reality, right? Where nobody wants to talk about because they're all, oh, no, that's too fluffy. Oh, that's too environmental. Mike, but that is what you have to focus on. So then when I started to, in my own journey, I started to realize that I think that one of the areas that I could bring the most value is this element of what does that mean to implement public-private partnerships. So now getting into the crux of your question, which is how do we bring capital to these things? How do we finance it? How do I get somebody to care about an urban village in the Himalayas? Right, and because it's only 1,000 people, but it is 1,000 people, right? And how do we? And part of that is IP transfer, Kunal. Part of that is saying, hey, find Arushi in that neighborhood, and hey, here, Arushi, here's a roadmap. Here's how you do it, right? And if you follow these steps, work with the government, work with your local banking institution, right? That's called a framework. A framework for, and in essence, a roadmap or the ingredients to a solution that actually addresses all of the elements: finance, access to capital, implementation, community development, a global agenda, right, and a regenerative infrastructure, right? So, and also when you're looking at regenerative and public and private partnerships, it can't just be a standalone. And that's also a problem with entrepreneurship, because we as entrepreneurs say, I'm just going to build the app. I'm just going to build a website. I'm just going to focus on the mobility. But then what, in smart cities, it's not that. It's the ecosystem, unlike the internet or mobile, can survive with me just building a single-legged solution, right? But in resilient cities, smart cities, intelligent communities, et cetera, right, there you actually need to think about a hub and spoke model. So if you're a hub or you're a spoke, or you're the hub and the spoke, then regardless of where you are in this ecosystem, it ultimately needs to be able to connect to other ecosystems. I've been in conferences where I've sat there with member states and folks in other countries, leaders of communities, villages, cities, countries, and not one of them could care the moment you go outside of this little circle, which is called my community, right? I remember a guy who was the head of a smart cities in a very populated area in the US, I won't say it, and I said to him, that's great, but you've covered the sexiest part. You have where all the commerce is, the entire GDP is. 1 mile out, you have people living in trailers. How are you servicing them? Not my problem, he says. That's his problem. That's Kunal's problem. He's the director of it, and he hasn't reached out to me, right? So a lot of, when I look at, and I've been watching this for over a decade, right? We have a program in Mexico called Imperative Fund, where we basically rebuilt an entire community. We raised money and we said to the money, you're going to get a 5% return. It's not great, but you're going to do impact. You're going to change the lives of 2,500 people. We're going to rebuild a community from the ground up. And by the time we leave, every single person will own their own home. And we will return your capital, and we will have changed the lives of people forever in this little pocket. And by the way, that plugs into all the other ecosystems, right? So after being so involved, I started to really realize that a lot of it is that the policy around public-private partnerships does not exist. So, one of the initiatives that we do with the, European Economic Commission for Europe out of the UN, the UNECE, right? We're working on a sort of a white paper that we're giving out to all the governments around the world, which is, towards an evaluation methodology on scoring mechanism of people first public-private partnerships, right? So the whole idea is, how are we bringing, the challenge is the framework is missing. People need a roadmap. PPPs, as we know them today, finance everything around the world, from water, telecom, electric infrastructure, schools, universities, right? But our whole idea is using that, going back to this element of the framework, the roadmap. It already exists and it works for rebuilding cities and rebuilding communities, right? Well, how do we make that into a bit of that hub and spoke model within the framework? Make the framework the hub and spoke model. So therefore, when someone comes in, you're going to ask the questions, check the boxes. Right, so our whole idea is launching a new model of PPP that requires new tools to also evaluate the impact. So impact and access to the capital is also then tied to how much good have you done, right? Are you doing good in the community? Okay, then you are access to capital from the banks and the institutions, right? Then we'll have a metrics that's not just revenue, but it's community return, community impact. And this element of people first PPP is something that we're really excited about, because it really goes across the spectrum of stakeholders, right? Access, equity, economic effectiveness, environmental sustainability, resilience, and replicability, right? Because this then generic outcome can be analyzed, right? Benchmarks can be elaborated, and then it can be scored, assessed, and then copied. So then when you are working with a government entity, or you are working with governmental stakeholders who might have some money, they're not going to solve the problem, right? But that partnership with the government is really what starts to make, the beginning of an actual project that can be replicable. Because in the element of smart cities, if you're not working with the local community, a local NGO, a local intergovernmental, sort of a platform, whether it's health or transportation, then you're on the outside, and that's why you're also going to have you're not going to have access to capital, because you're not supporting something that is the infrastructure, right? Then you're off on your own, and that's what part of what we try to do is really instill and educate people about public-private partnerships. Yes, a lot of people don't like the government. It's okay, but they have a job, and their job is us. Right, their job is, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, a government's responsibility is its citizens, its residents, its tourists, its businesses, its infrastructure, right? So if we, folks around here and everybody listening, wants to get into smart cities, building better cities, better communities, building impact around cities, then you have to embrace the fact that you need to embrace that government leader. And then you also, and by doing so, you're also securing the ability to go out and raise capital. For example, we have a donor fund, and we have, we look at projects around the world around, building better communities, right? And one of the core factors that we look for is, who are your partners? Because you cannot do this alone. I don't care what anybody says. There is no unicorn startup that's going to come in and be in a smart city space that's going to take the landscape, i.e. like a Google or an Amazon. This is way too, there is no community, village, or city that has the same fingerprint. Communities and cities and villages are like humans. They are their own DNA. What makes sense in Kunal, where you grew up, and Arushi, where you grew up, will not make sense where someone else in Africa grows up, or somebody else in Brazil in the favelas grow up in. And literally, it will not be copy paste. And this is also now part of the issue that we've had with scaling, right? Scaling this space, where everybody says, how do we scale it? I'm going to scale because I'm building the next Amazon. It's around policy. It's around the frame to be replicated, right? Because stakeholders are A, B, C, D, E. Benchmarks are A, B, C, D, E. Expected outcomes are A, B, C, D, E. Then plug, right? Where do we put each of the different stakeholders? Okay, here we need a university. Kunal, you can't do smart cities without having a university partner. How are you building capacity, right? I remember when you know, I've sat with so many leaders that are running smart city national programs. And the first question I asked them, I said, that's great. You're going to build a smart city that's going to be a spaceport, and we're going to fly people all over the place. But who's going to fly these drones, right? Who's going to fly? Who's going to man the drone port? Who's going to, so by the way, unless you're bringing 1,000 people from somewhere in the world that want to relocate to this area who actually are the skilled, you building capacity. So with that, if you don't have a university partner involved from the beginning, then you're not starting a conversation when the kids are entering school, because by the time they exit, they are already jobs. So, you know, these are all, you know, these are the real conversations that no one wants to have. Everybody wants to talk about, oh, how much data, and data is an asset of the community, right? And everybody at the next unicorn say, no, it won't work. I've seen over 1,000+ companies in the last 10 years, and very few of them are still around. I hate to say it. And the reason why, just to wrap up, why private or P3 and everything that I do is because I decided that as an entrepreneur, you know, I am going to stick to the core of how I got here and stick to my focus, which is I want partnerships to solve for some of the world's greatest problems, which starts in our own backyard.
Wow, I mean, it's so great to hear how you have revamped the look at PPP model, and also, you know, how you're bringing all of stakeholders together to make the change happen. It's really great to hear that. Thank you so much for sharing that. At this point, I think two, three things that comes to my mind. Of course, in one of the previous answers, you mentioned about, you know, briefly about the climate change. And the fact is, you know, with the declining climate and natural disasters, you know, we have had the 2018 California wildfires, the Australian bushfires, and then, you know, cyclones in India for that matter. In fact, my own ancestral hometown, Sundarbans, was very badly hit by Amphan, you know, this year. And all of these are going to be the problem, you know, unless we really solve, you know, that puzzle, and we are struggling to solve it. But keeping that in mind, since we are building cities, you know, for the future, how do we combat these, you know, sort of natural disasters and also sustain its aftermath? And I'll probably throw in one more question along with it. That is, to run these cities,
yes,
we need enormous resources and energy, right? And the world is probably at its, you know, sort of, it has lost its capacity for energy. I mean, it's probably facing the biggest energy crisis ever. So what are your thoughts on that? How do we run these cities once we have built them?
Well, great collection of questions. Let me just kind of jump into, you know, from the element of energy. I think that, you know, we have grown, and whether it's America, some of the larger cities, we have grown to become dependent on power grids. And I think the decentralization of power grids in America, in India, throughout Africa, throughout Latin America, is going to be the future of resilience, because we are pulling too much. It becomes a national security issue, not just here in my backyard in USA, but also anywhere if the power is controlled, you know, centralized. And I think that the greatest opportunities in not only security, but environmentally and the future of environment, and it is, sort of decentralized and really setting up, grids that allow people to, to enter their power so that power can be moved around. As you know, the problem with moving power around is not like connectivity, right? So every time you move power, it loses power. So you also have to have, that's where smart cities comes in. That's where intelligent, infrastructure, digital infrastructure starts to play an important role of helping us build and obviously better policy. Because if there's no incentive from the government to want to do it, then you're fighting it against a tsunami, right? And so, the beauty about where we are today and where climate change is going and what we're seeing as a reality every day is something that happens, like you were just talking about the fires and what have you, that nobody said would ever happen. Well, it's happening, right? And if we were to look back, 5 years ago and tell everybody that in the next 5 years, we're going to see 1 billion animals die. We're going to see 1 million people, die from an airborne disease. We're going to see X, Y, Z. People have said, you're crazy. At the end of the world. Well, no, but we're here. And the beauty about humans, the beauty about our evolution is that we're resilient, right? So and this is why these moments are so important, because we need to, embrace these things and actually say, how do we go from here? Where are the solutions, right? Power, is that something that, more and more governments, especially the LDCs, the least developed countries, and the Resilience Islands Forum, and all these different smaller countries that are spending 47 cents a kilowatt, right, are looking at how technology can be transplanted. A person that is doing this in California can copy it and bring it to Samoa and to the island of Samoa and said, hey, this is how we're distributed energy system looks like. And this is how we're using technology. We're using blockchain. We're giving people the ability to upload energy. It takes it away from the central infrastructure. And by the way, at the same time, they're getting immediately paid and they have currency. And look, Richard Branson said it best, right? Carbon economy and the energy sector, there's enough there thanks to, power coming from the sun and the ocean and the wind that, we could create $1 trillion market opportunity, or I forgot how many trillions of dollars he said, but, for the next generation, if they only just embraced it. And sometimes, because we have generational issues where the leaders of today, unfortunately, they're all 60, 70, 80 years old, don't relate to us, right? Look, I'm 45. I consider myself a straddle generation. I straddle the old and the new, right? I grew up in the old and I live in the new. And, your generations, and especially Arushi, grew up in a 100% digital environment, right? Like you weren't chasing information. Today everything's at your fingertips, which means that we could do more, not just have that information to do less. And so, when you're looking at, how do we build, these resilient communities of tomorrow, there are so many examples. What we need is organizations like what you're doing, Kunal, to continue to educate people, right? I wish I had as much information as everybody has today. When I was 12, we were analog. I had to call people. I had to go run down the block to get information for a little town paper. They would fax it to you eventually. It was faster for me to walk and get it than get it faxed, because nobody knew how to use the fax machine back then, right? It was just like mayhem. And here I was trying to start a little town paper. And fast forward, that's why I could speak with such great passion, because I've lived it. I've been there. I've dealt with it. And to me, when I look at today's generation, it's not about browbeating them and being like, you could do better. It's rather open their eyes, open their brains, and say, hey, imagine if generations before us got us this far. They didn't have anything. Not even about me, generations before us, right? Look at what we built. Now imagine what you could build, right? Imagine what anybody can. We were involved in a State Department program with the Obama administration, which was called the Global Entrepreneurship Program. The whole idea was how we helped launch it. And the whole idea was, as an entrepreneur, and Obama was saying, I want entrepreneurship and the American spirit to be, part of global evolution. So in your village, the next founder of Google will arise, or next founder of Facebook will be out of Arushi's, neighborhood. But then how do we support them? How do we, we connect the dots? Build a highway before you build a car, right? And part of what the GEP program was, and saying, hey, America's had an incredible success with Silicon Valley and innovations that have come out, sort of from a Western environment. Well, maybe peace through entrepreneurship, right? But all that we were doing was educating people that it was as simple as a group of people coming together and starting today and engaging multi-stakeholders and bringing different partnerships together. That is the first step. It's not going to show up. There's not a code that you copy. It's bringing this sort of human spirit together to want to build a better tomorrow. And to me, back to the beginning of your question, which is like, building these, resilient, ready communities, pandemic-proof communities. There's never going to be that answer, but we know where the problems are, right? Perfect examples like Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands, they're trying to figure out, right, how do we survive in 2050? We're going to be below water. The prime minister there was a president, basically had said, I want to move my people to another land. I want to find who can allow us to bring our country to your backyard. Well, then quickly realized that, hey, I am actually looking in the wrong direction, thanks to innovators, and everybody raised their hand, and everybody in the space was like, wow, I want to help a civilization. I mean, imagine that, being part as an entrepreneur to help another government, bring that innovation. So, with that said, again, part of what that government, when he first went out, which was great because he activated a community, he communicated to the world that this is happening. This is a reality. I don't think any one of us in any corner of the world want the blood in our hands that we did not step up to help do and make a change, right? I don't want to grow up and grow up to be 75 years old and say, I could have, I should have, but I didn't. And I think the beauty about what we have today is being young leaders, next-gen leaders, is that we have information. And we have the ability to go identify projects and then go reach out to someone and say, hey, can I build this in my own backyard? I'm going to give you a perfect example real quick before we move on. Is that there's an organization, a bunch of folks out of the UN called Oceanix. All right, Oceanix designs and builds floating cities for people to live in a sustainably in the ocean. Right? They build land and ecosystems that have energy, that have all of the elements of a city, waterfront real estate that is, flood proof, faster to deploy, cheaper, sustainable, and compared to land reclamation, right? It becomes the innovation that solves these problems for these small islands, right? Instead of going out and saying, I'm going to reclaim land or do whatever. And I mean, the guys at Marshall Islands, what they did is they brought some of that technology to bring sand from out on the bottom of the ocean. But ultimately, a hybrid, can work, right? So there's so much of these innovators that are some of the top, and they're looking for partners, right? All of these innovators are looking for partners. And I think that, it's exciting because I think that now everybody can step up. And again, programs like this is an opportunity to educate people, engage them, activate them, and show them the way, or at least plant a seed so that they become inspired, maybe to be like you, Kunal, to want to say, hey, I want to create an organization to bring leaders together. So whatever it is, I think it's, again, it's the information is out there, and I think we just need to continue to educate people and then have them localize the conversations because, every one of these projects counts.
I mean, fantastic, and thank you so much for your kind words, Sergio. And I'm aware that even, for example, one of our closer countries, Maldives, is buying up land in different countries, and they're driving most of their revenue that they earn from tourism into these directions so that they can move their country to other countries, backyards, as you say. But every entrepreneur that is listening in, please listen to the things that Sergio has said, that this is a solvable problem and some of the solutions already exist. We just need to partner with those solutions and then take it to places where the change can happen. And through this, then we will be able to build. And a floating cities is such a great example. And probably we can do much more, because I'm pretty sure in most cases these ideas just need fuel, and more than fuel, as you said, in most cases human power, right? So no, I mean, thank you so much for sharing such beautiful examples and stories. Now I'll come to you, since we're also speaking about old and new. I will come to one part which is also about cities old and new. That is, so UNESCO is one of the main actors in promoting culture as a fourth pillar of sustainable development, and protecting the cultural heritage of a region is a priority in today's world. Now, considering that there have been instances in the past where cultural heritage were sort of compromised in the name of development. For example, portions of the Pennsylvania Station, which was considered as an architectural jewel of New York City, was demolished to build the Madison Square Garden, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
And so, my question to you is, what steps can we take to preserve the cultural heritage while advancing the goal of building smart cities?
That is an excellent comment, and that's one of the things that I was saying when I was talking about kind of, before, which was, smart cities is about people, but it's not about adding more technology. It's not about adding more devices and more telecom, but it's also about how that technology can maintain the richness of the culture, can preserve it, right? And as well, not ruin it, right? Preservation is one thing. Another thing, a perfect example, with, a Moynihan Station, which is, Penn Station, is that, it is incredible artwork. And if it was up to the developers, they tear it all down, right? But instead, the historical preservation and obviously UNESCO and others said, hey, this is a landmark. This is something that, let's figure out how innovation, technology, culture, and the development of it and advancement of it all can fit in. Right. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, Kunal, which was all around the multi-stakeholders. So if you have all the right stakeholders around the table, then you'll be able to identify how not to destroy the richness of what that community is. Everybody thinks smart cities and they think flying cars and they think, all these other things. But no, you should not be able to see the tech. Right. When you look at, smart cities, we need to have safer water, safer electricity, safer connectivity, but open space, right? More parks, right? Not so we could go to the park and be sitting there and not looking at each other, but, be at the parks to engage, to enjoy nature, to enjoy the richness of that community, right? The richness of that village, that city, and really kind of, reinventing cities, again, as I was saying before, is not just about the technology. It's about, how do we, be effective about what's there, information, shaping societies to be more impactful, right? So, all of that is building towards a better place to live, a smarter city, right? Using sustainable development strategies and policies to make your place of living, place of work, better. And I love how, you looped in UNESCO, because, UNESCO in Reinventing Cities, I mean, they published a document. I'm trying to find it. If you go to the UNESCO library, they have a document called Reinventing Cities. And I will share the link and you could share it. But, what's really, again, this goes back to our comment, Kunal, which was, how do we, educate folks? There you go, I just shared it. How do we educate people to know how to do this better, right? Because I might love smart cities, but all I care about is the culture context. And somebody might look at me and say, well, you might as well, you're in the wrong place. No, you're not. We need that person too. We need somebody that's doing cultural preservation, somebody that's doing community, because if we have this tech, it doesn't mean we forget yesterday. It means that we're reinventing tomorrow with yesterday's notes, right? And so if we're not doing that, then, you know, what are we building? So I think, you know, that's another really exciting opportunity to embrace information that literally is out there for people to read, you know, learn, and see how, you know, again, from a UNESCO perspective, the culture and the identity of a city is important, right? Some of the greatest cities on earth, we don't want to take that beauty of why we love Mumbai, right? You're not going to sit there and say, okay, now we're going to make Mumbai into a 5G city and you're going to have devices everywhere, right? And you look around in those pictures that your aunt, your cousin takes when they had somebody come in and visit, all of a sudden it's surrounded by telecom assets. No, that no longer becomes the beauty of why you came there, right? It's integrated into the fabric in ways that you don't see it, in ways that it preserves the richness of the culture, richness of what you're developing, and not making it worse. And I think, to me, it's such an important topic, because again, when you start to get entrepreneurs to think about smart cities, they think about it, but they forget that, you know, they're more focused on, you know, how do you monetize the future rather than, you know, sort of preserve the past. And I think that's you know, it's not often thought about and it's not often spoken about. But thank you for asking that, because I think it's also so important that we don't let technology forget who we are or where we came from. What makes us all great is what the riches of our own cultures. And smart cities should allow us to embrace that, like VR. Right? When I look at it VR, so that I could look at an image, right? And if I'm in Mumbai and some of the greatest statues, and actually understand what it means, right? What is the history? Why is this goddess here? What was her? What was the reason? Like, all of a sudden in the VR world, I could actually, in augmented reality, excuse me, AR world, I could actually then learn, read, engage, and come out a more educated person, more cultured, right? Because even in a non-AR, I might have, you know, been Googling but not found enough. Therefore, the community themselves, by using technology, can now give you an entire download, therefore preserving the richness and the beautiful heritage that India has given to the world, while at the same time, you know, educating and bringing information at someone's fingertips.
Yes, I mean, I would definitely not want Chichen Itza or Taj Mahal to disappear for the sake of, you know, smart cities. So there you have it. Now, you know, we have spoke about what are smart cities, how you are building them, how they can be scaled. We've also spoke about sort of how do we solve the energy crisis, how are we going to run these cities in the future, how are we going to preserve you know, sort of the old part of the city, and also the culture that comes along with a particular city. We've also spoken about how for everything that we do, we have to put community and people at the center of it. But one question that I can't skip is that smart cities is not actually a new concept. I mean, we have been experimenting with this, and I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller and you know, the geodesic dome and so many other things that he have spoken about multiple times. And if I'm not wrong, I think Amsterdam experimented with the concept of smart cities in around 1994, and it's been quite long, and we have been doing multiple such experiments. Now, what do you think we did wrong, or probably, you know, I'll rephrase that question and say that going forward, that if we have to achieve this goal by 2030 in the next 10 years, what are some of the things that you are doing, or some of the suggestions that you have probably that will take us there? What are the right things that we can do to, you know, sort of this time the experiments actually work for us?
Well, I think the you know, we're a lot of the work that we're doing is anywhere from, you know, master planning smart cities. So we're working with Acon and the smart city project, and in Africa, you know, we're working in Spain and smart city project in Spain. It's called Elysium City. You got Acon City, Elysium City, and these are sort of futuristic cities that are focused on sustainable development. focused on embracing, sort of in Spain, it's more of a biodome and focused on health and the biosphere, and how that will become one of the most ecologically, connected, smart city projects, all the way to, what Akon's doing and wanting to, build capacity in the future of Africa, and through Akon City, all the way across to some of the projects that we're doing in the US, where we're working with, communities that are purpose-built communities, right? How do we grab a community infrastructure? And again, whether it's, in Europe, Africa, Latin America, or in the USA, there is poverty everywhere. And there is, infrastructure and opportunities. It goes back to what I was saying. It's like, it's a different DNA, but you could copy the framework. You could copy the mechanism, copy how, to improve people's lives. We have a global agenda, all the 17 goals. A lot of what I'm really excited about, where I see the future of smart cities scaling and really moving, and where I also would hope is sort of vertical takeoff landing vehicles, right? Sort of, VTOLs, which are VTOLs for vertical takeoff landing, right? And VTOLs that are, solar powered, right? That are, sort of moving at about maybe 100 kilometers, and you're moving people into other areas, right? If you go backwards in time, and even if you look at, for example, America, which is one of the newer developed economies, right? What was the development of it was the railroads, right? It was wherever the railroad ended is where communities were developed, where jobs were created, right? So to me, if you start to look at that and say, how do we are building tomorrow, we got to move people around, right? We have to move people around. We have to figure out a way to do it without burning so much fossil fuel, and do it in a way that's environmentally, that the fumes aren't killing us. I mean, you deal a lot with that in India, right? And then how do you start to use, sort of spatial opportunities that will allow us to, move people environmentally friendly and, create other newer communities, right? Not just other smart cities, but sometimes it's just as simple as, how do you move crops? How do you move, farmed assets? And so, that being one of them. Number two, I think is, financing mechanisms, which is really should be number one, financing mechanisms and ways to actually create models that allow people at the local level. One of the things that we were working on for a long time was a smart city bond, right? So basically, we raise bonds for wars. We raise bonds, for schools, for universities. None of those things have a quote unquote revenue model, but yet we invest because they're backed by government, right? So basically the government's borrowing money from the people to put to work X, right? So you're guaranteed a return on investment. So what if there was a bond, to rebuild your community? Well, you'd have people put in $100, $50, but you're able to engage local stakeholders to also invest in their own future, right? So what, building these mechanisms are sort of where we're trying to figure out is how to unlock scale, right? And not through technology, but by ways of inspiring people to, again, going back to using IP, transplanting IP, and creating that local, hyper-local opportunity. And a hyper-local opportunity, you're not going to attract outside European capital or American capital or wherever capital to a project, on a sort of southeast corner of the Himalayas where there's a community of X, right? But you will attract people that have been there, people that have relatives there, people that live there, right? And you're able to start to at least identify and create models that are, regionally sustained, right? Then you get some of the other, capital sources that then see that, hey, you've proven this locally. Now, how do we scale it? Right. Number three is I look at, again, going back to mobility, but, looking at data and the mechanisms of how we're moving people around. Forget just vertical takeoff, but how we're using technology to be more efficient. How, look at countries like, Singapore, right? You're talking about Amsterdam, but Singapore has been leading this conversation. They just don't call it smart city. It's smart government, smart governance, right? And proper public-private partnership leadership. So, only as of most recently did they start to celebrate everything they were doing as smart cities. and most recently, I mean the last 10 years, right? Because they were already doing it, right? Because they were just being intelligent leaders, right? And so, you know, right now when you start to look at what is a smart city, again, it's how you move people around, how you're creating engagement opportunities, how you make it easy to live there, pay taxes, you know, access services, and engage the infrastructure. And then last but not least, when you look at, you know, going into the data trail, you know, the greatest opportunities in a data economy is, you know, how are we building on top of that? How are we learning from what's been done? It might not be the best thing in the privatization and ownership of data by a select few organizations around the world, but rather, how do we use that at a local level? You know, there are organizations that have built sort of the spatial internet, right? Which is like, you know, we're working with a group, and basically what they're doing is drafting policies with IEEE, right? So that they can also then create the internet of everything. And I'm not talking about IoT. I'm talking about, you know, geospatial, not just GIS, but, you know, literally the depth of space and data, right? So, and then having a protocol like the TCP/IP, which is the internet, right? But how you engage that, right? And then when you start to think about, oh my God, the internet created this. What if you had spatial internet, right? That gave you access to information, not just documents and not just information that is entered, but actually 2D, 3D, right? Meaning that you're able to access you know, information. But for that, we need to build connected cities. For that, we need connectivity. So which brings us all the way back to connectivity. Without the connectivity, none of this exists, right? So then what is the basic element of, you know, building that smart city is, you know, sort of building a utility, right? Building a solution around, you know, the building a solution around connected infrastructure, connected, you know, communities, right? And you know, one of the things that we've been pushing and projects that we're working on, in essence, building a mobile virtual network operator out of a city, right? Because if I'm a community in Kunal and you're like, hey, let's retrofit 15,000 light poles and let's make them connected. Well, we're either going to put a Wi-Fi infrastructure or 5G infrastructure, but ultimately, Wi-Fi is not safe, right? And if we do it with a SIM card, that means that a telco is going to charge us like it's like putting a cell phone on every a pole, which as a city, it's just not effective. Then on top of that, whoever the telco carrier is not going to share the data. So a lot of what we've been working on is, as a smart city solution, is also building local telcos out of cities. Not because if you think about it, the connectivity will give you access at home. It gives you access in your community. And if you look at the stats, again, referencing the World Bank stats, I think the number is 70 to 80% of the people in any community, village, city don't leave their surroundings, right? Everything they do is there. So then when you look at what are the economic models, because smart cities is an economic development play, right? It is, you know, all inclusive, but also will identify that these other sort of, you know, as one would say, unicorns are opportunities that are scalable, because then all you're doing is customize it to whatever it needed locally, but you need to prove it in a lot of places. And so when I always tell people, I'm like, right now we're sort of in that evolution where the internet was, where everybody was laying fiber and, you know, people were connecting as much as they could and building these the infrastructure highway, right? When you look at smart cities, now we're localizing that conversation and making sure that we build that highway of connected, so that then we can build on top of that all these other solutions like vertical takeoff, electricity grids, right? Solutions for the universities, make sure that everybody has access to some connectivity somewhere, right? Hey, even at the community center, you come here, come do your homework, it's free, right? And all of these things that can be built and sustainable, economically, you know, viable, and the sort of, you know, economic development or GDP of that community inevitably will scale exponentially forever, because you've now educated an entire generation of folks and you've given them the tools. And these are things that are never measured. And when you look at a smart city project, nobody looks at the GDP of the community, the value proposition of 10 years, 15 years. They want to figure out how to make money today and have gone tomorrow, right? And that's the other thing, is that humanity is not a product, right? Humans, and being a human is not to be productized. And this is why, to me, when we're dealing with people in the smart city space, if they're not connected, then, I always wonder, so what's the agenda, right? Because you have to be there for the people. And then, and it's also a long-term conversation for everyone here. You're getting into the smart cities, sustainable cities, economic development through technology and digital infrastructure. It is a long-term conversation, and it must have the right DNA. And if you are able to build the model, you have to build the model to last, right? And then find the partners to evolve it. So, you plant the seed, the other guy waters it, the other guy harvests it. All right. So it's kind of identifying that ecosystem, so you could always pass the ball to the next group, and then they take it, because you can't be everything to everybody, but you need to understand what role you play in that ecosystem so that you can help advance it. And that's key. And so hopefully I've covered all your questions in that respect of what you just asked me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just overwhelming with so many ideas and so many thoughts and so many frameworks that you shared through this conversation. And thank you so much for that. I think this will really help our community. At this time, now it's time for some real questions, Sergio. I have a young voice with me, Arushi. Arushi is a young student, and she's also a member of our global volunteer community. And she has a couple of questions for you. So Arushi, if you could introduce yourself and ask your questions.
First of all, sir, it's been an insightful session, and I think because you walked us through how the real reality, the ground reality is, that's why it was more informative and a very pleasant session. Now, as of me, I'm a student of economics from the Delhi University, and my main purpose is, I feel, to create a ripple at a personal level, which then can manifest into huge waves, maybe. Now, coming to the questions, I would like to ask you the first question. During your TEDx Wall Street speech, you very brilliantly made use of the phrase media as the new currency. Can you elaborate on how it is a very powerful tool in today's world to bring about a social change? And also how the public foundation can sustain itself economically in a, let's say, post-COVID world?
So thank you for that, Arushi. And, when I started the foundation, one of the things that, really drove me to want to build a platform as a foundation was because, number one, I didn't want anybody to own it, including myself. It needed to be structured as an NGO and a platform for good, because we were going to embark back then, almost 10 years ago, right, in 2011, embark on this journey of pursuing one of the most powerful currencies in the world: media, data, and technology, right? Media is how we tell the stories. The data is how, what information it creates as it moves, and the technology is what allows us to move that media. But really, kind of go back to your question, when I did my TED Talk, I did that literally before I launched the foundation. So it was one of those things like, kiss the North Star and said, well, I'm going to do this because, when I was asked to do the TED Talk, they wanted me to talk about myself. And I was like, I'm not interested. And then they wanted me to talk about whatever. And I said, what did I talk about? And it was in Wall Street. And I said, well, I want to talk about what I'm passionate about, and I'm starting a foundation, but I don't have it yet. And this is you're asking me to do a TED Talk about what I believe in before I've even launched it. And I was very nervous, to be honest. If you look at the TED Talk again, you'll see me walking. There were a couple of guys that were there were busting my chops, saying that I was like a jaguar walking from right to left. And I was like, the only way I could, not be nervous. And I had my little note cards, and I practiced my whole speech. And really, because I was so passionate about something, but also so nervous, because I said, I'm going to put myself out there to the world on a TED Talk. And the vulnerability of just showing this dream before I even started to implement it, it just really made me nervous. And so, thank you for asking a question, because, that element of media is the currency for social impact is the vision that I had when I, as you both mentioned, I started when I was 12 in media. So newspapers, media company, post-production, graphic design, logo, web, as every iteration of the internet as an entrepreneur, we're just building another business to capture to try to, build another company, see what takes off. And then I landed on billboards. All of a sudden, I looked at the future of a wall, the future of a billboard. And what I saw was not what most people see when they see it. What I saw was this might be digital one day. This will be able to tell 1,000 stories, not one. This will also have connectivity. So if you see how the dots connect to where I am today, right? But I became passionate about it, but then I realized that there were no regulations that allowed you to do this. So I was talking to myself, especially in a room full of white-haired, gray, old men, and I was the only 27-year-old back then. And I was like, guys, where are we doing in the future? They're like, the future? I'm going to go play golf and retire, And these were the heads of industry. So I embarked on this sort of mission. Again, this is kind of my roots of my PPP, because I realized that when I was at the peak, we were one of the top billboard companies in America, third largest privately owned. We raised a lot of money, and we were on top of the world in the outdoor advertising space. But what I realized many things, right? Number one, I was lonely. Number two, where's everybody my age? Number three, nobody's thinking long-term, right? Number four, we have a means to control how information is distributed. Why are we not doing any good with it, right? And then it dawned on me, after watching all these campaigns and what you saw in my TED Talk about Bank of America, it dawned on me that every day we teach people how to kill themselves. Every day we teach people how to be negative. Every day we teach people, we give them the tools and we show them how to do what we don't want them to do. Or because there's a commercial agenda, right? If 50, 60, 70 years ago, I said, I'm going to make a $100 billion company out of drinking sugar, and it's going to kill people by the time they're 40 something, and everybody will have diabetes by the time they're 29 if they keep drinking this every day and they start at 9 years old. You'll be like, you're insane, you're crazy, you're Dr. Evil. Well, guess what? All those companies exist. So we're not here to talk bad about them. It's just the reality of how we've evolved. Look, we all love our sodas and what have you, and it's just how we've evolved. But that doesn't mean it's how we need to, evolve for tomorrow. That doesn't mean that that's the only means or be all. So to me, what I saw there was, from a Bank of America, we could get everybody to believe that this has been around for 100 years when it only started in 1970. Two, that we could keep drinking soda every day and it's going to help us be whatever, just get through the day. I was like, well, then that means that maybe we can invest 1% of that energy, 1% of that space, 1% of that time, and we could educate the next generation of Arushis that can be inspired to change the world, right? What if this young girl in the middle of Africa or even Brazil, for that matter, or Colombia, wherever, right, or America, says, I just made $150 or $500 selling cookies, $500 selling, this past 2 weeks selling lemonade to my neighbors, right? That young girl has two options. One is she goes and buys a bike and forgets, or two, she's inspired by maybe something that she saw somewhere, the same way we see buy Coke or buy Tide or buy this or buy that, was inspired that if she donated that $500 to a school in India, she could help teach 10 young children how to be better people tomorrow. Maybe feed them, whatever that is, or just finish building the school. They needed another $1,000 to build it. This young woman, now this young 8, 9-year-old, you've changed her life. You've rewired her DNA, that she, by just selling cookies and lemonade or whatever it is that she did, or her grandfather's gift for her birthday, went and had the opportunity to impact someone's life in another part of the world, it rewires you, right? But if you don't know that you could do that, if you don't know that you have an opportunity to do that and actually be able to understand the benefit and the value you've created for those that you gave, or those that you supported, or those that you helped, then you might never know, right? People say to me, why do you do what you do? And I said, I started this foundation because I realized that one of my gifts and what I've been blessed with, where business has evolved me to become, is that we have the ability to use these tools to help embrace and engage others, bring more people to the table, right? Bring more people to let them know that it's not about what we're doing, it's about what you could do, right? It's about what you could do for your people, your country, your city, your town, your region, your community, right? How can you engage them, right? And to me, media is at the forefront of it all, right? Unfortunately, right now we're reading about how, there's another movie out about how bad Facebook is and YouTube and everything that we use every day because it's feeding us. And in a pandemic, it's making us sadder. It is because we're watching how other people live. And what about worrying about how you live? Right? What about worrying about, not about how pretty or sexy this person looks, because that was really one of the problems that we were trying to solve, is saying, hey, you don't have to look like her to be powerful, beautiful, and smart, right? You could be the next president of your own country, the mayor of your city, and be that local leader. But then we need to combat some of that. I'm not opposed to the current economy. I'm just saying maybe that empty space can also be used. Maybe some of that, these media companies, as part of their social good messaging, could also use the same power that they have, that people pay billions of dollars to get access to, but give them access to those that are least, privileged. And it's not about a far left or a far right agenda. It's just basically, I say to people, I'm like, we do not, we don't push any agendas. What we do is we want people access to the infrastructure. We want people to think differently, right? And it doesn't mean you need me. Arushi, in your local community, maybe there's a local publication, and that local publication is not talking about impact. It's not talking about what we're talking about here. And maybe that just means that you need to write an article, an op-ed, or something on a monthly basis, and that will inspire 10 other Arushis, right? 10 other Kunals, right? And that, sometimes you might never know how you've touched someone else's lives, but just giving access to that information. That's why even earlier when Kunal was talking about, I gave you access to everything. Most people are like, oh, don't tell everybody, right? No, you have to, because if people are not inspired, right, like what Kennedy did to America, we're going to the moon, right? The Kennedy effect of inspiring a nation, spacefaring nation, changed the landscape of America. Every country has that. Every community has that. So to me, but the reason why that's not happening is because we're not using media to communicate it. And that was really sort of the genesis of when I said media, is the new currency for social impact. Why? Because we don't need to do anything else but use tools given to us to make it better, right? And like look, your channels and the people that you're in your surroundings, you're not going to inspire everybody, and you can't brainwash people to do anything. Rather, you have to show them and say, here are 17 goals. Here's an opportunity for you to do. What is that thing? What can you do? And that, to me, is what's exciting about media and what we do with the Public Foundation, because, we started with, using media. Today, we're running programs. Everything that we're doing is around, if you go to sdg.org, you'll see the data architecture that we built there with the UN Statistical Division. We're doing programs that are focused on, helping bring, capital, but at the core of it all is we communicate it to others. We engage others. We show them how to be part of the conversation. And without thinking of media and everybody in the NGO world, the last thing they think about is how to talk, how to communicate, how to market. Because, hey, I'm solving this problem in sort of eastern part of Mumbai, but okay, that's good. I'm doing the work. But no, you're missing this entire piece of inspiring others to replicate that, inspiring others to do that even without you. And that is what media allows us to do. If we could build $1 trillion companies, which we have, which we never in 100 million years thought that we would ever have a company that's worth $1 trillion, which is 1,000 billions. Hello, right? That means that we could build anything. We just need people to wake up and actually and get involved. And that's what media will help us do. God willing, I hope.
Thank you for your answer, sir. Coming to the second question that I have, I'm personally very passionate about goal 11 and 12. Could you tell us three things or actions that young people can take towards achieving sustainable cities and communities at the most grassroots level, that is?
Oh, let me unmute myself. Sorry. I think that when you're looking at, SDG 11, of course, we talked about this, right? Communities and helping rebuild, a lot of it is number one, 11 and 12, right? Because number 12 is ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, right? So how are we being smart about what we produce, right? And that dovetails into 11, right? And how do you use technology and build better communities for tomorrow? It's not just technologies, but just smarter, and smarter can be around policy. I think the greatest things that people can do is actually literally first look at the goals, look at the targets, right? And look at the indicators. Indicators have been built around the localization of the goal and its targets, right? So every government is going to have a different set of indicators, right? And some of them will have, different targets. But when you start to kind of, get involved in that, I think what's really important is for, as entrepreneurs and young civic leaders, right, is understand how you could identify with something. I think even when you look at goal 11 and 12, Arushi, as you said, you're passionate about these two, right? They're still big, they're lofty, they're huge, right? So you have to, in order to not go crazy and then lose all your inspiration, right, is you have to identify baby steps, right? Number one, identify what is it about 11 and 12 that you care about? What is it that lit that spark, that fire inside of you and said, hey, this is why I believe we need to make a change with 12. Now find that and build on it, right? Then as you're building on that one specific thing that Arushi makes you really excited about number 12, but it might not be the same that gets Kunal really excited and out of bed every morning, right? But so maybe it's not Kunal. Identify with other stakeholders, but also you have to remember that where you start is not where you end. And that's the beauty about the journey, is starting it, right? And understanding that you're going to evolve. Open-minded. Don't be so stuck on, okay, now I identified with 12.21, right? Rather, say, okay, this is the starting point, and think big, right? But do it now, right? You want to think big, act small, do it now. And I think, that's really my advice, because otherwise you get lost. And you don't want to get lost and disencouraged, right? That's one of our greatest problems. I always tell people, I'm like, okay, we've communicated media as a currency. We've communicated to a global audience, but we've left them alone, right? We've left them alone. And it's like, oh my God, are we doing good or are we making it worse? Because we're inspiring a generation to then be uninspired. And it's the worst thing you want to do. So that's why what we always try to teach people is, you want to think big, get the goal, the big picture, right? You want to act small and you want to do it now, right? And then identify other folks. And in that journey, it might be social media, hey guys, I'm working on this specific aspect of the goal. Who else is involved? And push yourself outside your network and identify and find out where these people are. Because part of multi-stakeholders too, and the beauty about, finding other like-minded people that care about the same things you do, is that I found that in my own journey, right? It wasn't about identifying an entrepreneur that says, oh my God, I love motorcycles, or I like swimming, right? It was around, some of the greatest relationships are around, oh, you care about smart cities. Oh, you care about, sustainable ecosystems in ocean, below water, whatever that is. The moment you've connected with that, you have such a strong bond. It's not, hey, we both drink Coke, or we both, like eat fried chicken. So it's like, or rice, whatever, right? It's not. These are different things that are not emotionally connected. And people that care about wanting to save wildlife, wanting to save, a life underwater, you're very passionate. You've got in there because of research information. And when you identify another like-minded stakeholder, sometimes it's just, it's magical. And these are the friendships and the relationships that you have. So part of that journey is identifying who else is out there also that can identify with you. And this is how, some of these social impact bonds are created, and not just around leadership as a young person, but also around leadership around specific topics, i.e. 11 and 12.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Arushi. Thank you, Arushi, for your questions, and thank you, Sergio, for such an insightful session. And as a host, it's really difficult when you have so much insight to sort of sum up the conversation. But I'll try my best. For everyone who is listening in, as Sergio put it, that we have to put people at the center of everything that we do. And the foremost importance is to build people-focused, intelligent communities. And don't over-innovate innovation, because partnerships and collaborations are going to drive it, and that's how we're going to scale it and make it happen. To build smart cities, we must focus on social, environmental, and economic impact and build it into the idea. We must run our cities with a decentralized power grid, but that is going to be the future. And we must educate people on how to do better and build better. And as he said, build tomorrow with yesterday's note. And where we start is where we are not going to end. And we're definitely going to build a better place to live for all the people in the world. But for all the young people who are listening in, think big, act small, but do now. And with this, we're almost towards the end of our conversation. I mean, we've overshot our time, and I've loved listening. So what I'll do is I'll put one last question to you, and that is, if you have to sum up your vision for a better world in one sentence, what would that be?
Kunal, I was, I'm laughing because you said it, and I'm going to repeat it. And I think that, when I attend a lot of events with youth leaders, and everybody's just so overwhelmed, and they're like, how did you learn everything? And how do you know so much? How are you so involved in so many things? I don't understand. They don't make sense to me. And I'm like, they don't because you haven't been through my journey, right? They don't because you're trying to get to the end product rather than build towards the product of what that tomorrow is going to look like. But if you don't start today, then how do you get to tomorrow, right? Build tomorrow today, right? So I think that if I were to, to give sum it up in one sentence, right? It really is, think big, act small, do it now. And I learned that from a dear friend of mine who runs a foresight group out of Sweden. And they're one of the old sort of foremost experts in sort of, systems thinking, and do a lot of work with government. And Bjorn, who's a CEO, a dear friend of mine, has always been of that mindset. And I say that I took that from learning from him, because when you have to explain something so big to someone, right? Like, I intuitively know how to do things, and people are like, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. Oh my God, you're so lucky. I'm not lucky, because I spent the last 33 years of my life, right, doing this and building, and every day. So every day I always think about do something good every day, right? But think big, do it now, act small, do it now is everything. I mean, to me, that is, it helps you simplify, because if you don't lay the first brick, you'll never, build a house. If you don't build a house, you never build a building. If you're not, building on top of that. And everybody wants a journey to be perfect. It's not. That's why you have to think big, because that's what inspires you to keep going, right? You have to act now, because otherwise you'll never get started. And then you'll always be dreaming big, but never get started, right? And then do it small, because it's like a step. You don't get from here, to, down the block by taking one step. It's a bunch of little steps, right? And then you get there. So, it's just kind of simplifying that process for big thinking. It's little baby steps. It's not you don't just get there, overnight. And if you don't start, you'll never know how to get there better, faster, smarter.
And we will get there better, faster, and smarter. Thank you so much, Sergio, for your time, and thank you so much for joining us. Everybody who is listening in and joining in, thank you to all as well. Remember, for a world where no one is left behind, it has never been clearer that all of us have a role to play in order to bring about change. Whoever you are, no matter where you come from, every one of us can make a difference. Every action truly counts. Get involved, attend the SDG Action Conclave 2020, participate in the SDG quiz, help raise awareness about the goals, and connect with a global community of passionate volunteers. This Global Goals Week, let us all come together to spread the knowledge about people, planet, and our sustainable development goals. Thank you once again all for joining us. Follow us on Instagram at Youth Forum India for all the updates. And don't forget to join our next session.
Thank you so much, Kunal. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.